Hey everyone, it's Johnny from Jettle here, and I'm joined by Greg, who went incredibly well in the business studies course for the HSC last year. He placed 16th in New South Wales with a final mark of 98%. Greg, thank you so much for joining us here today to share your wisdom with many other students who are currently doing the business studies course. How are you, and what's been happening since you finished the HSC last year?
Yeah, I'm good. Not much has been happening. I went away after the exams finished, and I just started university at UNSW doing commerce and law.
You mentioned just before we started recording that you actually were thinking about dropping law. So despite getting into it, why already, a few weeks in, are you thinking about getting rid of that? Because I think a lot of students out there listening who do well and get the marks will feel compelled to do law because one of those courses that has a bit more prestige attached to it. But why are you thinking about getting rid of it? And what's been your experience with making that subject selection going into university?
Yeah, look, I think there's definitely some tough decisions to be made when you go into university, especially as a student who may do a little bit better and can get into those courses which may hold a bit more prestige. I think I chose law maybe for the wrong reasons, and I definitely had an interest in it. My mother was a lawyer, my grandfather was a lawyer, and I did legal studies in school. And I think, my interest in law mainly pertains to business law. So that's more of like a kind of a subject area rather than a whole course. And just starting the degree, I kind of realized, 5 years of doing this, I don't want to be a lawyer. I want to go into finance. I think I really need more of a specificity in my study. And yeah, I just decided maybe it's not for me. Maybe making this decision early on will save me a lot of time and money, as well as allowing me to do a full commerce degree along with an associated study.
Yeah, and it's a gutsy thing to be able to, actually let go of that subject selection because a lot of people like having that title, but it is an important thing to do if you do feel that that's not for you and you know that your interests lie elsewhere. So, I commend you for that because a lot of people just would stick it out and do it even though they know they shouldn't because they don't enjoy it. But there is a fine line there. I'll just say that with a subject like law, sometimes it is worth sticking it out because you realize later on that, hey, I actually really do enjoy this.
And that's the thing as well. Like I'm still enrolled in the course. So right now I'm doing all commerce units. So I'm kind of doing a commerce degree. But if I change my mind at any point, and this is probably advice that I have for anyone else who's in the same boat as me, I can just go pick up law subjects again. And maybe it will take me a little bit longer, or I can overload in certain different terms and fix it. But yeah, just don't make any decision that you can't reverse too early.
Yeah, that's great advice. And yeah, the idea that everything is final, is kind of misleading and illusory. Like it's not that when you make a decision to, oh, okay, I'm not going to do law at the moment, it doesn't have to be the final thing. You can always come back to it. You can get into it, as you said, you can just not do the subjects for a semester or a year and see how you're feeling then, and then take it back up. People worry about falling behind, but that's also just a trap, and that's just not a real thing. Like you're not going to fall behind. There's no, you don't want to participate in that kind of rat race and that mentality anyway, right? If it takes you 8 years to get through uni, it takes 8 years. You're still going to be in your 20s, life's long. So I feel like a lot of people try and race through it, and they feel like, oh, whatever I do now has to be the thing I maintain because I don't want to have to spend an extra couple of years doing a different subject. I don't want to have to look back and think, oh, I wasted those couple of years. But it's never a waste. It's about actually learning what you like. And to learn what you like, you need to learn what you don't like. And that's the advice I always give to students. It's that when you're at uni, it's not wasted time if you decide to change courses. That was very valuable because it taught you something about yourself that you might not have otherwise known. And that's that you actually don't resonate with that particular subject area or that subject matter. So yeah, I think that's a really important point. Now let's talk about the HSC for a little bit. Let's talk about your results and how well you did. 98% in the exam. You were also at a school that took up half of the state rank places. So 10 out of the 20 students came from your school. You also, I believe, got around 50% of the whole cohort getting over 90 in the business studies course. That's outstanding. What's going on there? What's the formula? How did the school teach it to you? And what was the mentality that all of the students had to do so well on average?
Yeah, well, I think it's a number of different things, honestly. So, as you said before, like we had 10 people, including myself, state rank. So I think we had state rank 5, then 11 through 20. That's pretty unheard of, especially in business. And I think it's the culture, especially in the department. They didn't foster a toxic environment, but it definitely was competitive. We always knew where we were ranked before and after tasks. We were taught in a way which, we didn't dance around the subject. It was very, this is what you have to know, this is what you have to do, this is how you answer questions. So I think every student pretty much went in with a knowledge of how to band six that subject, and then 50% end up doing it. So especially when we were studying for the trials, especially and then for the HSC, we didn't waste our time. We didn't mess around with palm cards, stuff like that, because honestly, the course is too big for that, in my opinion. We, used whiteboards. We memorized the content back to front. It may not sound concise, but we were given 80,000 words of notes. The fact that, 50% of the grade was able to get across all that content in a way which made a band six, obviously, shows that we've school's been doing something right.
Yeah, that's amazing, and obviously they are doing something right. But you talked about, it's a very dense content-based subject,
Yeah.
right? So how do you manage that? What was the key thing you were doing in the weeks leading up to your trials, to your assessments, and to the final HSC exams?
Yeah, so just to preface, I definitely think that some people can employ palm cards in a way which is useful. And I know a few of my friends used online palm cards. I just found that the actual production of those palm cards, the time taken, especially because I did physical ones, just took way too long for me. I think where I kind of started was I formatted all my notes, made sure they were fine, and then I went to Officeworks and I got them printed and binded. When I got those notes, I just started going back to front, started the way my school did it, started in finance, then went through operations, marketing, and then finally HR. And instead of memorizing, I mostly just made sure that I understood everything incredibly well. Every single concept in the course you could ask me about when I was, at my peak, and I could rattle off the definition, its characteristics and features. And then with a little bit of thinking on the spot, I could tell you three advantages, three disadvantages. Personally, I didn't do much practice writing. That's just different for me. All my subjects were analytical writing based subjects. So I found that I didn't have to invest as much time into understanding how to write as other people, just because I kind of I was practicing it every day in every subject. The school kind of gave us a format, and it was like, if it's an analyze, this is the way you do it. If it's an assess, this is the way you do it. If it's a discuss, obviously there's different ways, and that formula was really helpful. You just insert your knowledge in your mind. So definition, maybe characteristics and features, a positive, a negative, a positive, and then how you break them down within. The most useful thing that I can say is don't stress about memorization, stress about understanding.
Yeah, awesome, man. And when you say you didn't do a lot of practice writing because a lot of your other subjects were analytical, so you were kind of used to that form of writing and being concise, did you still do a lot of practice papers before the exam?
I'll be honest with you, I don't think I did a single practice essay for the HSC or the trials. I definitely did practice multiple choice and shorts, and that is what helped me a lot because if I remember it correctly, I think it was 94 for my trial, which was pretty high. But what helped me with that was getting 100% in the multis, and that was just because I probably did, I don't know, 50 papers worth of multis. I think another key thing is I didn't really practice writing shorts. I practiced formatting them. So I would get a short in a paper and I would write like def, so DEF, semicolon, and maybe a short definition, then just PNP or so positive, negative, positive, or just little points. And I wouldn't completely write out a whole short answer. I would just write like, what is the content I would put in here? Because I knew that I was able to kind of, write a short under pressure, a short answer, but it's just recalling that content, which was the most kind of specific thing and most important thing to myself.
And why do you say the trials are the most important part of the HSC?
I went into my trials ranked nowhere near as high as I came out. After the HSC, when you get your results, you'll see assessment mark, and that's the mark allocated to you by the rank that you were. I was third ranked going into the HSC. The assessment mark I received was 98 because that's the third highest mark that was achieved on the day. But the actual exam mark I got was a 97 in the HSC. But then it rounds out to an HSC mark of 98. So it helps you to be higher ranked. And trials obviously are hugely weighted. Our trials, some of them are 40%. You can make a lot of ground in those trials.
And did you have much of a break between the trials and the HSC? Did you have, do you remember how many weeks it was you had off before you started going again? Because obviously burnout's a real thing. And, I think
Yeah.
some students feel
Yeah.
like just after trials, got to start preparing for the HSC. But it is really important to let your brain kind of recharge, to get some of that social life back into play. So what was your approach to that?
Yeah, look, we were still in lockdown. But I'm not proud of it, but I had a month off. It started as a week off, and it turned into 2 weeks off. And then my dad started getting annoyed at me, it turned into three, and then eventually four. And then before I knew it, we had like 6 weeks to HSC, and I was kind of stressed. Because what they don't tell you is you come out of trials and you pretty much forget everything. Like you will have to run over every piece of content again, 100%.
But I think that's a really important just fact and an insight even, that you might think, oh, I'll give myself a week off and then I have to get into it, but you actually don't, and to still go well. Like, it's sometimes it can be counterproductive to start earlier than later. And I think
Yeah.
that's what that your story kind of shows there, that you ended up doing so well across the board in all of your were into exactly what you were trying to get into. But the reality is, after trials, you had 4 weeks off. And whereas other
Yeah.
students might not even give themselves a week off, and then what happens is they're going to burn out, because sustaining that level of intensity with your study for 10 weeks is just really not that feasible, and it's not necessary.
I think I'll also say that our HSC was very different to the one that, probably everyone watching this video will be sitting this year, next year, whenever this is being watched. Most schools do trials at the start of term three, kind of weeks 1 to 3 or 2 to 4. We always do it at the very end of term three. So our trials always encompass all the content being taught. But saying that, our HSC was pushed out by a month. So I kind of had that extra time to kind of flounder and waste. But I think it goes hand in hand. Like, I had the time to waste, but I also worked a lot harder because I was at home for, 3 months before trials, just only studying. I wasn't allowed to do anything else. So that effort to kind of rest ratio was kind of a lot, higher, more elevated than, some people will see in the coming years.
How did you keep motivated, as you were going through the exams? I'm sure there was a point, like you just said, that where you were like, oh, I'm really over this. I just want it to be done. Don't even care how I go anymore. Like, how did you push through that? Were there any strategies you used to stay not even motivated, but just disciplined? What were your kind of habits around that period?
One of my key things was, like, my best mate and I, we pretty much did all the same subjects, and he was actually out of state for most of COVID, but we still made sure that we zoomed like every day. So we would jump on a Zoom at like 9 in the morning, and we'd work through to the night. So we were easily averaging 8, 9 hours a day, like peak study. And it was just that sense of connection. Like, he and I are very close. We're both very similar in terms of our subjects. So just being able to, even if we weren't working together, just having someone, up on the screen here, kind of, doing the endless kind of work and slog with you was really helpful. It's probably the number one thing I did. You shouldn't also feel guilty about the times where you jump on a Zoom at 9 o'clock and you only end up working at 12, like midday through the rest of the afternoon, rest of the afternoon and night, because you obviously needed that connection. You know what I mean? Like, especially in the COVID times.
Yeah, that's such a great point. I'm so glad you brought that up. Like, that social connection is so important, and there is no point going on this journey alone as some kind of like lone wolf. Like, I have to do everything myself. Definitely, it's a critical part of the whole process, is to actually be part of some kind of community. And it's probably not spoken about enough how important that is on these journeys, because doing anything by yourself in a silo is only sustainable for so long. And then naturally, you're just going to procrastinate and not do what you're supposed to be doing, because you have no one who's sharing in that journey, keeping you accountable, and also keeping you motivated by help balance in that kind of the discipline of study, and then needing that relief, that social release as well.
I think especially with that social learning, like, I'll give some business specific examples, which I think will be very helpful for someone. When my mate came back to Sydney and, the kind of lockdown lifted, I would go over to his a lot, and we would sometimes just literally sit in two chairs looking at, the syllabus. We'd have finance, ops, marketing, HR, and one of us would literally just point at a syllabus dot point and say, okay, tell me, the case study because the school gives us case study. Tell us the case study for that, or tell me the definition of that, or tell me advantages and disadvantages of that dot point in relation to that dot point. So the business syllabus is so big that you could literally sit there for days. I really didn't like focusing on, oh, what could they ask? Because I feel like that's an endless trap, which you're going to end up getting burnt at some point during year 12. But having that kind of, especially for dot points, which I wasn't completely across, having that discussion with someone else and getting those different kind of perspectives was really helpful as well.
Yeah, definitely. And I feel like that tip just about sitting there with a friend and doing that Q&A through all of the dot points and through all of those subcategories is so important. And that basically, to me, sounds like that was your practice. They were your practice papers in a sense. And this is just like memorizing an essay for English. No point writing it out 20 times because that's going to chew up days. Whereas if you just say it like a speech, try and do things verbally, you can get a lot more done, but still retain a similar amount of, the content in your memories.
Yeah, I think especially, like, I don't want to come off the wrong way, but I would say that business studies is not necessarily a difficult subject in terms of like understanding the concepts. It's the reason it was one of the more difficult subjects that I did was because it was just a lot to remember, honestly. Like it's not really that dynamic in terms of answering. Like there will be questions that will throw you. There will be links that they're trying to make in the questions where, you will be a bit confused, but with a little bit of thought for a couple of minutes, you'll always kind of be able to figure it out if you're across the content and the syllabus. And yeah, I think it's just knowing the content well. Otherwise, yeah, you're gonna end up being thrown by something.
Yeah, so and that's kind of a great summary of those devices that you use to remember things. But just so I'm clear, one of the things you did was you had a whiteboard, someone could have pen and paper, and you actually did write out in kind of a dot point form, I'm assuming, all of the key points that make up the syllabus. And then you also used mnemonics, trigger words, terms to help you remember things, so that if you remembered that word, you then remembered the rest of the content.
It was just like that. Like before I would even start studying a topic, I would just make sure, the syllabus back to front. Like if I have nothing in front of me, I can tell you exactly what role for that topic was, what influences were, processes, and then strats. And yeah, if you can get yourself to a point where you can go on a whiteboard and write out the whole syllabus and not miss anything, you're gonna automatically be 50% of the way there.
Yes, amazing. And I think, there are a couple of other variables then, but something you kind of keep coming back to even implicitly is having that kind of cohort that is motivating you as well. Some students might not have that. Your teachers are clearly amazing in that they pushed everyone to actually go and do all of this work, because this is a lot of work, being able to just sit there or even have the stamina and the discipline to go there on a whiteboard and write out the whole syllabus. That takes a lot of discipline. But if you have that kind of group accountability, and as we were talking about, just have one or two friends that you're doing this with throughout the whole process, but having that accountability element and people to do those question and answers again and again is also a pivotal aspect of the whole thing.
Yeah, and I think especially if people are watching this who haven't chosen the subject yet or are unsure if they're going to take it into year 12, I don't think the purpose of this talk is to scare you out of doing the subject and saying, oh, you're going to be putting in 4 hours a day worth of business at least, because it's not like that. I definitely know people who are able to band 6 and maybe didn't study every day for business or didn't really put in a terrible amount of work. But I think it's just it's exponentially harder to get a higher band 6 as you put more effort in. So the difference between a 90 and 95 is not the same as the difference between a 95 and a 99, 100 in business. It's a lot different. And I think just the difference between people who are able or want to put in that work and who don't is the people who are actually passionate about the subject or not. If I had to assign weightings to the significance of importance in business studies, I would say 70% of the importance is knowing your content. 10% is kind of understanding how to answer questions. So especially short answers, having a structure that you always use. Then kind of 10%, it's just understanding the syllabus, how it interconnects, and just sitting there and being like, oh, if I got asked influences on strats, these are the ones I'd go to. And then maybe 10% is case study, if that, or that case study 10% more being, can I, do a practice answer, fully fake case study or a few points, and can it sound believable? Because being dynamic like that, it will help you a lot more than memorizing 5,000 words of case study, which you're going to forget once you get a little bit stressed. I think case study is put into business studies more to kind of separate the top of the herd, kind of, in terms of marks. It's to show the people who are able to like analytically compose something in relation to the real world. And yes, some people don't necessarily use real world stats, but that's not what it's kind of testing. It's more testing the fact that you can kind of change your writing style from theoretical to practical.
Yeah, I
So, yeah.
understand what you're saying. It's appreciating what could be relevant and could apply to a business. Now, before we wrap up, I'd love to hear your thoughts, tips, strategies on the business report. How do you write a business report? Do you have any general tips for people there? And also with the extended responses, any tips you want to offer for those two? Because I know they're two big sections of the exam.
Yeah.
So if 20% each, that's 40% of your exam and your final mark, that's huge. What's your advice for each of those sections?
Well, I'll start by prefacing that, it's 40%, but, think about where 60% of the exam comes from, which is your multis and shorts. So if you can get away with, just writing anything for a business report, you're probably going to get at least 10 out of 20. I think at my school, I don't know what they're called everywhere else, but we call them section 3 and section 4. So one's the kind of stimulus question, and then one's the third one, and then the fourth one is just the question. So we have very different approaches for those. So for section 3, it's obviously you're not using any case study. So to beef out the report, you're going to have to be using a lot of real world examples. So I think something that we always were taught was just remember the words such as. So every time you make a point, the next sentence should start with such as, and then put a real world example. You should be seeing that word such as, in my paragraphs, after I wrote them up after trials, I had like 30 examples just scattered throughout my report. I think that really helps kind of add some layers to your report, and especially for section 3, you can get away with content dumping a lot more. Because we were taught to write as much as possible, so we would come out of exams writing 10, 12 pages for both reports. Section 3 is pretty simple, but it's kind of got this elegance about it, which not many people can master, and that's how to write in a way which is just going hell for leather, writing as fast as you can, but composing it. And making it kind of elegant, I guess is the word. And then for section 4 is kind of that home run. You get to the end of the paper. You've just got, you're just going to be doing theory case study paragraphs. So the way we structured it was executive summary, then you do a corporate descriptor. I'm not sure if many schools do that, which is describing the company you're going to talk about in the case. And then, you just jump straight into a theory paragraph, then the associated case study, another paragraph under it. And just keep doing that for as many as you can. Definitely a big thing across both reports, which is key to remember, is if a question, especially for section 3 that has multiple dot points of questions, if the last or like maybe second question says strategies or uses a plural or processes, it's asking for more than one. You have to use over 2.
Okay, great. No, that's really useful advice, I'm sure, for everyone listening. Do you have any other like final tips, final words of wisdom for the general course?
I think it's definitely a marathon. The HSC especially is marathon, but business studies even more. And for those of you doing modern history as well, it's the same thing. But with business, I wasn't operating at 100% throughout the whole year. I had a rough first assessment where I was ranked like 30th out of maybe 150. It's so rough, but wanting to be at the top 5 of the cohort, that was not the entry I wanted. Through that, term 1, 2, and 3 was when I kind of picked up. And I think that's what led to me having so much energy for trials for business, was knowing that there was so much more I could give to the subject. And then, I think don't burn yourself out trying to do well in the assessments for an extra mark. Make sure you have that kind of reserved energy where you can get an extra 15% in the trial, because that'll help you so much more in the long run.
That's awesome, man. Thank you so much for coming on and providing all of that wisdom. I'm sure everyone got something out of it, and really appreciate your time in sharing that, Greg. So all the best with your studies at uni, and we'll chat soon, man.